Hi everyone, welcome to Broadband Deployment News. So the infrastructure bill, the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, was passed by Congress and signed into law by the President on November 15th, but that doesn't mean that Congress is necessarily done with their part. I'll be right back and we'll talk about that. Thanks for joining me. Rick Husey here with Broadband Deployment News. So the IIJA has $65 billion in it for broadband, $42.5 billion of that in what they're calling the Broadband Equity Access and Deployment Program, which is designed to provide broadband access to areas of the country that don't have good broadband, which they call unserved or underserved. There's money in there for a broadband affordability program. About $14 billion of that is on top of that $42.5 billion. Plus there's middle mile infrastructure. There's money for tribal. Lots of money in there. So as I mentioned, Congress passed the bill, and that passed through both the House and the Senate by slim margins, and then the President signed that into law on November 15th. But that does not mean that Congress's role is done, and a lot of that will depend on what happens in the midterm elections as well. So I just wanted to kind of bring that to everybody's attention, just make sure it's something that's on your radar screen, just to realize that that's something that will be taking place. So. I saw two stories here recently that made me think of this. Both of them, one about the House and one about the Senate. So this would be, if you want to look at it as the Republicans in the House trying to flex their muscles as far as getting in on some of the oversight kinds of activity that would take place in Congress. And that's really that's what Congress would be involved in after this point, would be an oversight, right? And the House, excuse me, not just the House, but the Republicans in the House and the Senate were kind of not, they were not as involved in this bill. They didn't have a lot to say about it because they are in the minority both in the House and the Senate. It did pass in both House and Senate, but there was very contentious debate on certain things. A lot of it started based on the amount of money. Eventually that was reduced quite a bit, which I think was able to get it passed. They reduced it down, the infrastructure bill in general, down from what it was going to be. Of course, they separated out actual infrastructure from the social programs, which were later split out into the Build Back Better bill that doesn't look like it's going anywhere. That's a whole bunch more money for non-infrastructure kinds of things, kind of environmental, social justice kinds of things. So that was separated out, and then they reduced the amount of the infrastructure bill down to $65 billion for broadband. But again, Republicans want to have a say in how that money is spent as far as oversight, making sure that things are done properly. And that's in the situation that they're in now in the minority. But we have the midterms coming up in 2022 in the end of November, and there's certainly a possibility that power in Washington could shift quite a bit. I mean, it could be that the Republicans take over both the House and Senate at that time, and with Biden's popularity, his numbers, favorability numbers being fairly low right now, it's very possible that we could see a shift. So that's just something to be aware of. So I did see these couple of stories here. So here, House GOP leaders seek NTIA oversight hearing, cite billions in broadband subsidies and spectrum management issues that need vetting. So this is just kind of the first shot over the bow, I think, on this that we're seeing. And you'll notice here in a minute that there's kind of a coordinated effort on this, both in the House and the Senate. So House Republicans are urging Democrats in control of the chamber to hold what they said is a long overdue oversight hearing of the NTIA, National Telecommunications and Information Administration. Mike Doyle, Democrat of Pennsylvania, the ranking member of the committee and subcommittee. Kathy Morris Rogers, Republican in Washington, and Bob Latta, Republican in Ohio, pointed out that there have been no oversight hearing. There's been no oversight hearing since the 115th Congress. It's currently the 117th Congress. So that does seem to be overdue. Given the new programs established across the federal government that provide hundreds of billions of dollars that can be used to support broadband access, including at the U.S. Department of Agriculture, that would be the USDA Reconnect Fund, for example, U.S. Department of the Treasury, that would be like ARPA, U.S. Department of Education, Federal Communications Commission, that would be things like RDOF. It's imperative that we understand how NTIA plans to track and coordinate these programs effectively. Republicans are worried, among other things, about the waste funding duplication about the waste funding depletion. I think they're talking about there, if you've already got good broadband in an area and then you're wasting money by overbuilding in an area that already has good broadband, they're worried about that. Potential fraud and abuse obviously is always an issue, and government subsidized overbuilding of existing commercial providers. So if you've already got a commercial provider, then funding a municipality to overbuild them doesn't make sense, they're saying. A lot of people want to see competition to bring prices down, and that's one way to do it. But you do have the issue if you've got a commercial provider like a cable company or a telephone company, and then you bring in a municipality that has less of a profit motive, and they could be happy with break even, right? They want to improve broadband for the community. They want to lower prices so they can just put broadband service out there at a break even point, and that's going to possibly drive the other competitor out of the business if they do that. So there's concerns about that. They also point out that there continue to be disputes among federal agencies and commercial industry over spectrum. Most notably, though they do not identify any particular disputes, the current one over C-band spectrum users potential. Am I reading this right, or is it just written wrong? Most notably, though they do not identify any particular disputes, the current one over C-band spectrum users potential interference to aviation systems. Yeah, it's not written well. So that's what I covered yesterday. Actually, was there is this controversy right now between C-band spectrum and the altimeters in airplanes, and the FCC originally approved all of this under the previous administration, and now they're looking at this as being a potential problem for altimeters as you get people that are using 5G service with C-band spectrum. Is this going to interfere with altimeters and their ability to judge where they are in relation to the ground? This would be the ground sensing altimeters that tell the plane how high they are and help avoid collisions, those kinds of things. So that's one thing they bring up here. So Congress tasked NTIA to establish a Spectrum Information Technology Modernization Plan to improve these spectrum management activities. We need to hear from the Biden administration about its progress on implementation. So that was that story about 6 days ago. And then about the same time, I think the same day, and written by the same author, actually, John Egerton, we have something about the Senate. So Senator Roger Wicker seeks better NTIA FCC cooperation. So again, he's trying to get his voice out there. And I think we're going to see more of this as this money gets closer and closer to being delivered, and then also after it's delivered, and especially again after the elections. The ranking member of the powerful Senate Commerce Committee wants the relationship between the new FCC chair, Jessica Rosenworcel, and the new NTIA head, Alan Davidson, who was just approved a week or two ago, to start out on the right foot. In a letter to both, Senator Roger Wicker, a Republican from Mississippi, called on the Federal Communications Commission and the National and the NTIA to work together to better coordinate spectrum policy. The FCC and the NTIA under the Trump administration were sometimes at odds over spectrum issues and how the government spectrum that the NTIA oversees could be shared or freed up for commercial 5G use while still protecting important government uses like radar and GPS. So he's kind of bringing up the same thing. So they're both, at this point, focusing on the spectrum issue and the NTIA's oversight of that, and again, this potential issue with C-band interference. So Rosenworcel, for her part, has already pledged to Congress to work cooperatively with the NTIA. The FCC and the NTIA have a memorandum of understanding on how they will coordinate spectrum issues. Wicker said that the 2003 arrangement needs updating since it does not appropriately account for the dramatic changes in technology in the past 20 years. And it certainly has changed. Wicker has a rooting interest in that update. He introduced a bill last year, the Improving Spectrum Coordination Act of 2021, that would require periodic updates of that MOU that we were just talking about there. So again, a big factor in this is going to be what happens in the 2022 elections, because those elections are going to take place before any of this money is released. There's no way we're going to be having, well, I should say that the vast majority of the money from the IIJA will not be released before the 2022 elections. And that's because the Notice of Funding Opportunity will probably not come out until mid-May. And it actually, from what I understand, it can come out later than that. So they could get it out sooner, but I don't think there's any way they're going to get it out sooner. They have a lot of work to do. This is the NTIA, in order to get those NOFOs out to be able, that are basically going to describe how the states can then get this funding. And the states have to do their action plans. They have to send in letter of intents and do their action plans. There's a lot that has to take place. So the NOFO has to come out from the NTIA. The states respond. There's FCC maps that have to come out, and there's a question as to whether those will be out, in May. And there's a likelihood they won't, because there's a lot that has to take place with those FCC maps. So it's very likely that we will not be seeing even applications taking place until possibly, and this is applications from going back to the NTIA, until possibly early 2023. That being the case, it could be that we have we'll have a new Congress, and it could be that we have Republicans in charge of both, or one of the houses. They're one of the either the Senate or the House. And that being the case, could certainly change things, because the Republicans, again, they've been in the minority, and they might want to be doing increased oversight of these funds. The bill is passed, so the act it's law, but there's a lot of leeway that the NTIA has on how to interpret that, and some of that could be challenged. So it remains to be seen how Congress will be taking on their role of oversight, and if that changes, and how much that changes from the elections. So that we'll see. It will be interesting for sure. So thanks for joining me. Hope this was helpful. If so, give me a thumbs up on the video and hit subscribe. And you can join me, hit the little bell, and you can join me every day for broadband deployment news. Thanks a lot, and I will see you next time. Bye-bye.